growth in the US, where the COVID-19 pandemic is gaining ground.
Hero Young, Chief Economist at Mirabeau, great to have you with us on the show today. Thank you so much.
I'm placing a new order to buy British pound. At 123,740.
We're on it to send a rather super electrician in 4 hours before you've tucked into your lunch. We can also assemble plumbers, locksmiths, glaziers and drainage engineers. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line. Residential properties. Optional add-on up to 1,500 per caller. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Decisions, decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Wednesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. We can replace your battery at over 700 stores and garages, or even at your home or work with our mobile experts, so you can enjoy an engine that starts first time, every time, and start enjoying the open road again.
Are we nearly there yet?
From battery replacements to tyre fittings to MOTs, there really is no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
4 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The idea is to really hold the economy in suspended animation until we get control of this virus.
We are very much in a picture of monetary dominance.
We will get slower growth. I mean, let's not get confused about that.
We are in a national crisis. I think it is for all parties to pull together.
The euro area is facing an economic contraction of a magnitude and speed that are unprecedented in peacetime.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning from London.
New position open on British pound and 123.74.
With Matt in Berlin. Let's get to some data, shall we, Matt? And we've got Euro area June manufacturing PMIs, 47.4. The prelim number was 46.9. So the good news is it's better than the preliminary estimate. It's moving in the right direction, closer to 50, but it is still in contraction territory. And we don't really know how much to rely on these PMI numbers just now, given that they are kind of sentiment indexes, aren't they? And how that actually ends up translating into economic output is still a good question, given what these markets have been through and what these purchasing managers who are surveyed for this data have been through.
People love them, though. Anna,
people do love them, and we always should bring the latest data to you. But we see fairly flat, or not really much reaction, I should say, in the euro on the back of what's been a whole slew of PMI data points this morning. So 112.32 is where we trade for euro dollar right now.
Almost all of them beats, by the way. I just want to point out, if you type EcoGo on your Bloomberg and then you put European Union into the box, you can see all of the national and intra-national numbers that have come out. So almost everyone we've reported today, even though, for example, Spain, not above 50, Germany, not above 50, but better than the forecast had been, better than the survey number. So even though they're not getting to expansion in many countries, as they are, for example, in France, they're beating almost everywhere, with the exception of, as far as I can see, Italy and the Czech Republic.
And that is good news, so let's take it where we can get it, shall we? And what is that doing to equity markets? Well, not a great deal, but we have had a fairly flat session, really, Matt, for equity markets this morning. The Stock 600 up 0.1%, the FTSE underperforms, the CAC 40 underperforms, the Xetra DAX is relatively very strong, up by around 0.7% this morning. The US futures picture is flat to negative, so we're down by between 1 and 0.2% for US stock indexes, so not by much. It is, of course, a holiday-shortened week in the United States, and so markets will be closed for an event of some kind. Can't remember, Matt, that's taking place on Friday, but we will get some jobs data before that. I'm enjoying messing with you, Matt. Right, the oil price up by 2% this morning, and so we see oil stocks doing quite well, and not a great deal of movement in many of the FX crosses, but we do see some movement in the yen.
It is Saturday, by the way.
It is Saturday, but there's a holiday on Friday.
No, well. Okay, yes,
no?
But the actual Day of Independence on which we Americans celebrate, throwing off the yoke of, United Kingdom control,
but hey, we're
getting rid of the taxation of the king for
without
our colonies
representation
is on Friday, and I got a special pedicure in commemoration of that.
Yes, and I'm just very thankful that this is radio, so you can't share that with our listeners.
Let's talk. I have a quasi German American guest to bring on. So we'll talk about this with Kurt Custard. He's the Chief Investment Officer at Newton Investment Management. We had him on television earlier, and we love to have guests on from Newton Investment Management. Kurt is, what you were telling me, you're German, but you grew up in California, right? And that's where I think we see some of the biggest problems, Kurt, California, in terms of the COVID-19 crisis. How much of a concern is the really worrying growth, for humanity, worrying growth in coronavirus cases for you as a market participant?
Well, that's a great question, because obviously, first and foremost, it's the humanitarian side of it that, impacts me. I have family out there, and I've been out there a fair amount. In fact, I'm going out there again, hopefully in a couple of weeks. But I think from a market perspective, what you're seeing is you're going to see a pretty decent strain on the medical system in a variety of states. California very much varies county by county. L.A., Imperial County, they're not doing well. San Diego is doing better. So, you have to look at where these things, the regional impact of where they're going to hit. From a broader perspective, the fact that they're having to roll back all of the openings, throughout the South and the Sun Belt in the United States, it's bad for the SME sector. I mean, there's just no way around it. I mean, the idea that they're going to keep the bars open, but they're not going to allow them to serve alcohol, to me, is slightly comical. I don't know how many people are going to go hang out inside a bar and drink water. So, I do think this is going to continue to persist for a while in the U.S. It is interesting, the American reaction versus the European reaction towards the whole COVID thing. I've spent 15 of the last 18 years here in Europe. The Americans are sort of behaving like the Americans have a tendency to do, which is that they're not great at being told what to do, especially by the government. And so when you've seen this massive resurgence in cases in the U.S. right now, I think a large part of that is that rebelliousness sort of manifesting.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see whether Western democracies in all their forms, with all their different cultural idiosyncrasies, whether they manage to get a handle on these flare-ups. And that will matter to markets, won't it? Another thing that really matters to markets is how much support there will be from governments and also from central banks. Kurt, what do you expect from the whole conversation around the Fed right now? We hear from the Fed this week that containing the virus is the important thing. But what do we need to see from the Fed from here? They've done a lot already. They are big players now in some of these big markets. What else can they still do?
Well, I think that the Fed has always sort of worked primarily by moral suasion. Increasingly, as you commented on, they're directly intervening in the market. It's very interesting because I think that they're doing probably the right thing for now to be able to support the market, et cetera. But after the GFC, they don't have a lot of firepower left. And they're increasingly having to get to what I would call more direct interventionalist kind of responses to any kind of economic crisis. And what that does is while that supports the market in the near term, it sort of dampens down their ability to act in future crises, right? So you every time you raise the bar, right? So when are they going to start buying equities, as an example, or when are they going to start buying, asset classes that they're currently not permissioned to buy? And that's something that I think is potentially down in the pipe. And that, for me, as a capitalist, as someone who participates in the markets, I don't want a long-term environment where, the government, in any form, in any government, is a massive market participant.
But you do want to know when they're going to start buying equities and hopefully pick the companies they buy before it happens, right? I mean...
Okay, I'm on Bitcoin. I sold short at 1,144.
Politics of them buying individual stocks would be so fraught that I would hesitate to go there if I were anyone on the Fed board. But I do think it does create a distortion. We're in an environment now where the level of debt in the U.S. and in China is becoming the tail that wags the dog instead of the other way around. And we just have to be very careful of that. I mean, the last time we've seen debt levels this high were after World War II, and it took both the UK and the U.S. a long time to work that down. And we're sort of nearing that circumstance now. I mean, the level of indebtedness suggests that we can't have rates go up without starting to impair the ability for companies to pay.
The UK took till the 90s, I think, to pay back some of that debt to the US. As we navigate, as investors now try to navigate then their way through the headwinds created by coronavirus, the geopolitics that is very present for us with tensions between the US and China, where do you look then for opportunities, Kurt? If you've got sort of a 5-year view, we asked you about tech and renewables on TV earlier, but also emerging markets, where are you selectively looking in EM?
Well, it's really interesting because emerging markets should be an area of growth. I mean, not only are they naturally having an emerging middle class in places like China and India, which are huge, massive market segments. I mean, they just dwarf almost any other consumer behavior. But you've also had, at least in the case of China, them actually coming through the COVID crisis relatively unscathed. The challenge will be sort of now navigating the politics, because clearly the U.S. administration is concerned about the rise of China and Chinese egress. The law that just took place 24 hours ago in Hong Kong is a huge change from the environment Hong Kong used to operate in. I mean, the law is so vaguely worded now that it potentially could create frictions with the U.S. And I think all these geopolitical sort of issues are going to have to make navigating where you invest in these markets much more specific. No longer can you really buy an ETF or just a broad China play. I think you have to start getting down into individual names and looking at individual sectors within those economies.
Kurt, we all know that polls can be misleading, and this early, they don't mean too much. For example, Donald Trump was looking like he was going to get trounced by Hillary Clinton this time 4 years ago. But, assuming that this poll has a little more weight, Joe Biden seems to be at least 10 points up on Donald Trump. What do you think would happen? How would markets react to a Biden win?
Well, I don't like to really comment on politics too much, but I can tell you that I don't think there's been much change in the tax structure baked into current equity market prices in the U.S. And so if you were to suggest that the tax structure is going to change, that is going to have an impact. Now, I don't think, having read the tea leaves to the extent that I am, and I want to point out that I'm not a political analyst, but it doesn't seem that especially given COVID, major tax increases are on the table. But we could see a change, in things around. I mean, there's been a lot of social justice movement discussions going on in the U.S. Income inequality throughout the West has been a hot button issue, and so it wouldn't surprise me to start to see those kind of topics come into the election discussion after either going into or just after the election in November.
Kurt, thanks so much. Thanks for talking to us on TV and radio. Kurt Custard, CIO at Newton Investment Management.
Let's get it over to Carolyn Hepker now with global news headlines. Carolyn?
Thanks so much, Matt. Hong Kong police say that they have made their first 2 arrests under the new security law that gives Beijing broad powers to rein in sources of opposition. It comes less than 24 hours after Chinese lawmakers handed it down. Police say they have arrested a man holding a Hong Kong independence flag and later a woman with a sign reading Hong Kong independence. Critics say the law will seriously undermine Hong Kong's autonomy. The US is going in the wrong direction when it comes to the coronavirus. That's the warning of infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci. He says that daily cases could more than double to 100,000 if behaviours don't change. In his testimony to the Senate yesterday, Fauci also said that he's aspirationally hopeful that a vaccine will be ready by early 2021.
We are cautiously optimistic, looking at animal data and the early preliminary data, that we will at least know the extent of efficacy sometime in the winter and early part of next year.
Here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson unveiled his plan for the UK to build its way back to prosperity, but the package met immediate criticism from opponents who claim it offers no new money and falls well short of the Roosevelt-style New Deal the government had touted only the night before. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Caroline Hepker. This is Bloomberg. Matt.
Thanks very much. We'll be right back with more market action. This is Bloomberg.
President of the Jewish Communal Fund, Zoya Raines, and her husband, Robert Friedman, Jewish activists and philanthropists, talk about why they chose the Jewish Communal Fund for their charitable giving.
As very busy working parents, we wanted to focus more on the charity part of it and wanted to focus more on our children and less on the administration.
The Jewish Communal Fund is one of the oldest and largest donor-advised funds, but at the same time, they are totally up-to-date and have state-of-the-art systems for us to access and manage our contributions online. The assets in our fund at the JCF grow tax-free, so we can generate more charitable dollars to support the charities that we care about most.
Let JCF minimize your taxes and maximize your charitable giving.
We're incredibly passionate about our charity, and the JCF allows us to focus more on the charity and less on the administration and the headaches.
For more information about Jewish Communal Fund, visit our website at jcfny.org and request a new fund kit.
Sudden shock or sustained slowdown? When uncertainty threatens, shareholders look to the C-suite to maintain profitability. And for 2 decades, the leaders of Fortune 500 and Global 2000 companies have turned to GEP for results. GEP's procurement and supply chain solutions help reduce costs, improve performance, and boost EBITDA, helping great companies stay on track and primed for the next phase of the business cycle. GEP, helping the world's best companies do better.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Guy Johnson.
Despite the tough environment, the French automaker Citroën is launching a new electric crossover. Vincent Kobe, the Citroën CEO, joining us now. Vincent Kobe, thank you very much indeed for your time. Some might argue this is a tough time to launch a new car. What are your expectations for this new vehicle? How do you think it is going to sell in the coronavirus environment?
Yeah, first, thanks very much for having me. And as you all know, the industry has been shaken by the recent crisis, but we still believe it's a proper time to launch a car like the new C4. The market has evolved a lot. We're talking purchase pattern, we're talking powertrain, but I think the demand, and we saw that in the last weeks, at least in continental Europe, has been extremely strong coming out of the crisis. Obviously, the type of transportation, the distance of travel will evolve, the economic powers will be, at play, but we still believe that there's a lot of demand for individual mobility, for a protective cocoon a car is. And obviously, we're launching this new C4 with a fully electric alternative, which we believe will address the growing, concern or interest for sustainability.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Danny Berger with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now, we are in the start of the second half of the year. Stocks starting this half with a whimper after a roaring second quarter. We're seeing European stocks higher by just 3 basis points. Meanwhile, U.S. futures lower by 8 basis points. Really not a lot of movement here. I should say volumes off as well. If you look at the Euro Stoxx 50, we're off 70% of volumes that we usually are at this point of day, looking at the 20-day average, so not a lot of action. FTSE 100 dropping 4 basis points to 61.67. The DAX, however, is higher, up about 0.6%. Really, the thing leading the way here are oil and gas stocks. That's allowing the index to move into the green somewhat. Meanwhile, we are seeing WTI higher, likewise nearing a 4-month high. Speaking of commodities, we're also looking at gold rallying today, passing $1,800 an ounce. That's for the first time since 2011. Now, meanwhile, we're looking at other assets really stuck in a range here. The Bloomberg dollar spot also range bound, trading around 112.20 rather. The euro dipping slightly earlier. Now it's back up just 7 basis points though versus the dollar trading at 1.12. We're looking at the pound. A similar story here, just barely higher today at 1.24. Meanwhile, we're looking at bonds. Again, the same story. We're looking at the yield on the 10-year increasing just 2 basis points to 0.68. Bunds raising 2 basis points as well, still though at a negative 43. And gilts, again, not much movement, just a 10 basis point gain. Now, might be ahead of that 4th of July holiday in the U.S. We're not getting a lot of action, but there was action in China. The CSI 300 index made its highest close in 28 months today. Quite a powerful vote of confidence despite that intense pressure from the U.S. But again, elsewhere, not a ton of action today. And that's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Caroline Hefter with more on what's going on around the world. Caroline.
Thanks so much, Danny. Almost 90% of Americans are dissatisfied with the state of their country. That's according to a new study from the Pew Research Center. And the unhappiness is hitting the perception of President Donald Trump. He is now 10 percentage points behind the expected Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden. According to the survey, 54% of registered voters back Biden, 44% support Trump. In Australia, officials in the state of Victoria are reimposing lockdowns in several Melbourne suburbs amid a spike in virus infections. The measures take effect today and will last until at least the 29th of July, with people allowed out only for essential reasons. International flights into Melbourne will be diverted for the next 2 weeks. And here in the UK, children in Leicester will be heading to school for the last time for at least another 2 weeks today. The city has been put into a localised lockdown, meaning that classrooms will have to shut tomorrow. The decision to extend measures like closing non-essential shops was taken following a spike in cases of coronavirus in the city. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Caroline Hepker. This is Bloomberg. Anna?
Caroline, thank you very much. We have European equity markets then kind of treading water, I was going to say, but actually making some slightly modest gains right now, up around 0.2%. The FTSE 100 is a bit of a laggard, but I think we're going to talk geopolitics and talk about what's going on in Hong Kong. Sophie Cameron-Din, our colleague, joins us from there now. And Sophie, we have not had long for people in Hong Kong to get used to the imposition of this new security law brought in by the Chinese this week. And yet we already see an arrest under this security law. Tell us a bit more about this arrest.
Yeah, and I have to say it's quite surreal. It's a year on from the protest last year that saw the Ledgeco being broken into. I'm in Victoria Park in Causeway Bay, where there are hundreds of people who are gathered. They're milling about. They've not been able to really form a unified column, if you will, to march to any single destination. But again, they are coming out in response to this security bill being passed by Chinese lawmakers, bypassing Hong Kong's legislative council in doing so. Within the 24 hours of this bill being passed, 2 individuals have been arrested under the new bill, and the police have been updating on Twitter the total number of arrests. Over 70 so far have been arrested for participating in unauthorized assemblies and other related offenses, including 2 for suspectedly violating the national security law. That is according to the latest update from police on Twitter.
So what does all of this mean, Sophie, for local businesses or for international businesses that want to, earn revenue in China and Hong Kong?
Firstly, Matt, taking on the perspective of the local business environment, leading up to the release of the bill on Tuesday night, you already had so-called yellow businesses removing some paraphernalia that is related to the demonstrations. You had Joshua Wong, one of the activists here promoting democracy in the city, resigning from the Democisto party. So there's a sense that there's a need to understand where you may run afoul of the law and what measures you can take to ensure that you can continue voicing out your thoughts and ensuring that freedom is obtained. But today we are seeing how that is in action. Again, police are we have a heavy police presence. They're trying to dispel crowds, but it is largely peaceful, I have to say. Just now, it looks like some kind of pepper spray or rubber bullet was used in the immediate area. So I'm just seeing some smoke in the distance here, but people are moving away from that area right now.
Okay, Sophie, and I guess we need you to stay safe as well, so we'll let you go. Sophie Cameron joining us there from Hong Kong. Really interesting to see the many legs to the tensions we see between China and the United States at the moment then, Matt. Just earlier on today, of course, we saw Chinese response to what it sees as media incursion, if you like, or suppression of Chinese media in the US. And so the Chinese making their own announcements about what US media needs to do in China. That's one leg to it, of course. And of course, the Chinese saying that they will retaliate if the US imposes any sanctions on China over Hong Kong.
Yeah, so a lot going on there. And just to paint a picture, because it's radio, Sophie Cameron all morning has been standing amidst protesters and police. At one point, we saw police firing what appeared to be either rubber bullets or tear gas. So she's wearing a bright yellow vest that says press. Nonetheless, we want her to stay as safe as she can. It's great to get that intelligence.
With the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report, I'm Charlie Pellett. Netflix says Colin Kaepernick is joining with Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Ava DuVernay on a Netflix drama series about the teenage roots of the former NFL player's activism. Netflix says Colin, in black and white, will examine Kaepernick's high school years to illuminate the experiences that shaped his advocacy. Further casting details and a release date were not immediately announced. The Chicago Bears are offering full refunds to season ticket holders because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And NASCAR may be racing during the coronavirus pandemic, but celebrating in early December now is off the schedule. The Motorsport Series has canceled its Champions Week and Cup Series awards scheduled for early December in Nashville, citing the uncertainty from the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on the industry. And that's the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report. I'm Charlie Pellett.
This July 4th, tune in to the Boston Pops right from your home. For greatest hits, finest moments, guest artists, and a special performance of a stirring salute to America's heroes. From first responders to essential workers, we honor those giving their all in this time of need. A Boston Pops salute to our heroes, presented by Bloomberg and Eaton Vance. Watch and listen from home Saturday night starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
Not completing high school. Different adapts. Different overcomes. Different keeps moving. Different keeps thinking. Different stays connected. Different never stops dreaming. The University of Northampton invites you to a virtual open day for a taste of all the benefits of studying with us from this September. Search University of Northampton Virtual Open Days. It's the future, but different.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. Why not book an MOT to get you safely back on the road? With over 600,000 carried out every year at 350 garages, you can always count on our experts. And get back to visiting those you've missed the most.
Hi, Mum.
From a safe distance, of course. From MOTs to battery replacements and tyre fittings, there's no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
I was offered one.
I was offered one.
Were you?
Yeah, I was offered one too.
1 2 1 2. I was offered one.
I was offered one.
Don't take our word for it. 9 out of 10 people said they were offered a great value deal with O2. Get yours today, in-store, online or by phone.
I was offered one too. O2 Retail Exit Survey 309 of 348 agreed with the statement. O2 offered me a great value deal. For full verification, see o2.co.uk/terms.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished. With over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Whether you're dreaming of a house the size of a football stadium or a football stadium in the back garden of your house, what you need is dream come true money. Luckily, Friday's Euro Million Super Jackpot is a massive £110 million. Now that's dream come true money. Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Play online or on the app. Estimated jackpot rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
We're all guilty of spending too much time on social media. Why not add something genuinely useful to your feed with TuneIn? Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about some of the best stuff happening around the app. You might just discover your next audio obsession.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio. To New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Good morning from the Bloomberg Bureau in Berlin. I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Anna Edwards, live from London. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. It's just gone 9:30 here in London. And let's get to some breaking news, some data across the Bloomberg. The UK June manufacturing PMI has come in at 50.1. That is entirely unchanged versus the preliminary number, also 50.1. So that is good news in the sense we don't have any deterioration in that particular data point. And it is just above 50, which suggests some economic expansion, which is a little bit of good news. We'll take that. Let's have a look at some of the data we've got.
Exclusive club.
Being above 50, you mean?
Yes, only the UK and France in the euro, in the eurozone, in the euro. What should we call it? In the European continental shelf, let's say.
Is it wider than the eurozone?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not in the eurozone, you're not in the European Union. But I know a lot of British people like to consider themselves European still, so you can say that you're on the shelf.
Let's not start that one again. Very much in Europe, if not the EU. Right, the Stock 600 is up by around 0.25% right now. The FTSE 100 is a bit of a laggard, down 0.1%. The CAC 40 also weaker by 0.25%, but the Xetra DAX actually up by 0.7% this morning. US futures, if you're looking ahead to the US trading day, US futures suggest some weakness at the start of the day, down 1 or 0.2% at the start of trading. We've got the dollar on the back foot actually this morning, so we don't see an entirely risk-off picture coming forward, coming through on these equity markets. But when we look at FX, we do see a little bit of movement into the yen and certainly out of the dollar. And that movement into the yen is with the dollar yen. It's also with euro yen and the pound yen. So we're watching the Japanese currency with interest. On the commodities side of things, we see some enthusiasm for oil, at least, with the price of a barrel of oil on Brent at 42.31. This is Bloomberg.
This is the Brussels edition, Bloomberg's briefing on what matters most in the European Union this week.
Welcome to this new episode of the Brussels edition. We are joined by our reporter in Brussels, Maria Tadeo, and this week we're looking at Angela Merkel and Germany as the country takes over the rotating presidency of the European Union for the next 6 months.
Yes, and Matt, you are in Berlin, and you know there's so much happening for Angela Merkel, Germany. The short term, of course, it's the recovery fund, but over the next year, we're going to have to deal with the Brexit negotiations, the U.S. election, China, perhaps even more tariffs. And the one line that Angela Merkel keeps repeating, which I find fascinating, is the fact that there is no time to waste.
Yeah, and there's a couple of really interesting about faces, too, right? Just a year ago, there were two narratives. One that, she was in the twilight of her career, that her power was waning, Angela Merkel. And the other, for so long, that Germany was unwilling to spend money, any more money, especially to help the peripheral states, which, German citizens are always so worried about having to work so hard for so long and pay so much taxes. They feel like they're supporting people in peripheral states that retire earlier and don't typically pay taxes to the same extent. In any case, the corona crisis has changed that. Merkel has built a lot of power and a renewed political base because of the way Germany was able to handle the pandemic, and because of how frugal the Germans were. They have so much money and credit and can spend it now that it's necessary.
Exactly. And what's also interesting, again, going back to the point that you made, is that she's fundamentally moved on those red lines. As you pointed out, they're now willing to spend money. That was a big question mark for a very long time. And she's also now saying it's okay to take on more debt. It's good for the European Union in the extent that we need to prop up this recovery, and we have to do this collectively. And I think the question that's really being asked both in Berlin, where you are, but also here in Brussels, is really, why is Angela Merkel doing this, and why is she doing it right now? And to talk about this, we're now joined, I'm happy to say, by Jana Polerin, who is the head of the Berlin office and a senior policy fellow for the European Council of Foreign Relations, and she's joining us on the phone. Good morning.
Hey.
And I guess a question, I'm just going to throw it to you, is why is Angela Merkel doing this right now?
Because she perceives the coronavirus crisis as a real existential threat to the European Union, which is, kind of unprecedented. She says this is the biggest challenge that we are facing since the Second World War, and I think she really was worried that the EU might fall apart when we had the negotiations about the corona bonds and kind of the toxic debate re-emerging that we know from the Eurozone crisis.
So, that's an interesting debate that seems to still be happening, Jana. I mean, even though Merkel and Macron are backing this plan for the European Union to borrow as one, it would seem like shared debt to me. We talk to, CDU lawmakers all the time who are like, no, it won't be shared debt. Are we looking at the first time Germany is willing to step into?
In Germany, what Angela Merkel repeats, and especially when talking to her own party, is that she emphasizes this is a one-off situation. This is unique in history. This will not be permanent. This will not be repeated. This recovery fund is something that we need to do now, but this is not the new normal in German thinking on the economic and monetary union.
That's what they always say.
Yeah, in the South.
Jana, let me tell you something. I'm still paying a solidarity tax so that East and West Germany can get together. That was over 30 years ago, and that was a one-off thing then, too. It's been 3 decades.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I think especially in the South and in France, this is perceived as a radical change in Germany's position on EU debt mutualization. And they think that Germany has all of a sudden become more southern. And this has all given rise to the expectation that the economic and monetary union will be quickly developed further. But that is not the story you hear when you talk to conservative lawmakers. So it's really the question whether this Hamiltonian moment, first of all, is one, and second, whether there is a permanent and structural change in the German position.
And Jan, I'm always curious, and not to be Machiavellian here, but you're saying Angela Merkel really gets that this is a moment of almost make or break for the European Union. But I do wonder, Germany is a country that makes a lot of things, makes them well, and makes money from selling them to other countries. Is there an element here of just self-preservation for Germany?
No, absolutely. And Angela Merkel makes that very transparent and clear, but I think it's good that she does it and that she explains to the German citizens that we have kind of a national interest in preserving the Eurozone and in helping the other countries, that we don't do that for altruistic reasons, but that we have a clear interest in doing this. And I think the communication this time is pretty good coming from the government, much better than during the Eurozone crisis or during the migration crisis.
So are they going to be able to get it through? You've got the famed Frugal Four who had been against this. I think the vote's coming up, January 27th? Is this going to happen?
Well, this is the biggest expectation, I think, on the EU Council presidency for Germany to deliver, to somehow convince the frugals to buy into that big recovery fund deal, and also to get an agreement on the multi-annual financial framework. These are the two big issues that the Germans need to resolve, and they need to do it quickly because already in Italy and Spain, people get nervous that the money doesn't come in time also to counter a possible financial crisis that might be looming.
And why do you think she's switching sides? Because she clearly has. She's gone from being on the rooted him to now joining Macron, saying it's okay to take on more debt. Why is she changing sides now?
Yeah, because this is a real existential threat, and she is afraid that the EU might fall apart if she doesn't. And also, she needed to do something because of the single market. I mean, the other countries have noted very well that Germany's kind of national efforts to help German companies make 50% of the total state aid that is approved by governments across the EU. So Germany basically is beefing up its companies and taking advantage of the suspension of state aid rules due to the comfortable fiscal margin, which other countries don't have. So Germany needed to do something to counterbalance that.
What do you think about, let me just quickly get into U.S. intervention here. Nord Stream 2, the U.S. has pushed hard against it. It's, at least from one angle, understandable, right? Because you don't want Berlin funneling money to Moscow while they're annexing Crimea. Is it going to go through?
Well, the question, I mean, I'm very much against this whole Nord Stream project from the very beginning, but the problem is that the more the Trump administration takes an issue, the stronger the opposition in Germany will become. I think that kind of the American approach towards this issue, even though there might be kind of a good reason to do this, is not helpful for everybody in Germany who makes the case against Nord Stream 2.
And I'm wondering, just to go back to Angela Merkel, there is speculation, and of course she said it many times, she's not going to run another term, that this is it for her political career. Where do you see her going next? Do you actually rule out that she's not running again?
I will rule out that she will run again. I think she has said that very clearly, and we also need to take into account that the current boom kind of in the polls, the 40% that we see for the Conservatives, is largely due to Merkel. But we have seen before the crisis that kind of people got the impression that she was tired, that she was no longer up to the job, and that can come back easily once kind of we are over this crisis. So I think the CDU is very conscious that they need new faces, new personnel, and also new ideas.
It does look like, I mean, they've gotten a big boost here, but that's largely due to Merkel. And to me, Olaf Scholz also looks great through this crisis. Of course, the SPD as a party isn't very popular right now. Who's the next chancellor?
I think this is too early to tell. We don't even know who's the next party leader for the CDU-CSU, and this is very interesting because the whole race got completely kind of turned on top because we had a clear candidate, Armin Laschet, who had the support of a majority of the CDU-CSU, and he was supposed to be the winner of all of this, but he's also head of the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia, doing incredible incredibly bad in his crisis management. So kind of the number one option is, I think, no longer the clear winner of this, and we don't have a number two. Jens Spahn, our health minister, is also doing great, but he aligned himself closely with Armin Laschet, and now the question is whether he will dump him and kind of change camps and run on his own, or whether he will stay in Laschet's camp. So I think it's very interesting to watch in the next couple of weeks and months.
And as Germany takes over the EU presidency, do you see them paying more into the military? Do you see them increasing any contribution into NATO? Is that going to be a theme? And then I'm always curious, who is going to be the first European leader to say we need a European army that we pay for?
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Wednesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
In line with government guidelines, face coverings are now compulsory on public transport. At Asda, you can get a 4-pack of Prima disposable face coverings for £2.80, or a 2-pack of washable face coverings from £2.50. Asda, we're all in this together. Selected stores subject to availability.
How do we control coronavirus now? This is Scott. He's a nurse.
NHS Test and Trace helps stop the spread of the virus in our communities. If you've got symptoms, even mild ones, get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we can trace the people you've been in contact with and contain the virus. So get tested and protect each other.
To get a test, go to nhs.uk/coronavirus or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
If you want to find out what the best laptop is for all those video conferences with your colleagues while sitting at your makeshift desk, you could ask a machine, or someone called Mac, or Kai, or Rachel, or one of our other tech experts on Shop Live, Curry's PC World's online video call experience.
Hi, you're talking to Ali on Shop Live.
Isn't it nice to get advice from another human being? They're just a click away. Curry's PC World. Start the conversation now with Shop Live.
Whether you're dreaming of a house the size of a football stadium or a football stadium in the back garden of your house, what you need is dream come true money. Luckily, Friday's Euro Million Super Jackpot is a massive £110 million. Now that's dream come true money. Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Play online or on the app. Estimated jackpot rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game, from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
Looking for your daily fix of NFL news and analysis?
In that. So we had to blow it up at the Super Bowl predictions instead. Because we
Look no further than the Pick 6 podcast, where CBS sports writer Will Brinson gets you up to speed with what's trending in the NFL that day, so that you're always in the know.
Yeah, it's pretty revealing of Brinson's methodology for predictions. When he gets mad at people for predicting good teams are going to win the Super Bowl or good players are going to win major awards, that's how you wind up.
Search Pick 6 on TuneIn to listen.
To help keep you and your loved ones safe, TuneIn has the latest guidelines from the CDC. Outdoor gatherings, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Stay at least 6 feet from people you don't live with. Wear a mask. Don't share food, toys, or other items, and avoid shared surfaces. Participate in events like these infrequently. For the latest stories and updates on COVID-19, search Coronavirus News on TuneIn.
Edwards with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. European equities up by 0.3% then this morning. The CAC 40's a bit of an underperformer, down 0.2%, and the DAX outperforms up around 0.7. But broadly speaking, we're gaining a little momentum as we go through this session. US futures still point negative, down by between 1 and 0.2% really for the major indexes. The Asian session was actually fairly flat overnight. There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to the geopolitics between China and the United States. There's also plenty of news flow surrounding the virus, of course, and the ongoing battle against that in the US. That captures investors' attention, of course, but also the flare-ups that we see in Europe and in parts of Asia also. Let's check some other assets for you. We've got the oil price is on the move, up by around 2.9% for Brent prices and also WTI. We see money coming out of bond markets and therefore bond yields going a little higher. The yield on the US 10-year currently stands at 0.677. Not a great deal of movement in FX markets outside the yen. There does seem to be some movement into the yen, though. The yen currently up around 0.4% against the US dollar. It's also proving to be pretty strong against the euro and against the pound. Elsewhere, we're fairly flat to negative on the dollar this hour. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Caroline Hepker with more on what's going on around the world.
Anna, thank you. Hong Kong police say that they have made their first 2 arrests under the new security law that gives Beijing broad powers to rein in sources of opposition. It comes less than 24 hours after Chinese lawmakers handed it down. Police say they've arrested a man holding a Hong Kong independence. It comes less than 24 hours after Chinese lawmakers handed it down. Police say they've arrested a man holding a Hong Kong independence flag and later a woman with a sign reading Hong Kong independence. Critics say the law will seriously undermine Hong Kong's autonomy. The United States is going in the wrong direction when it comes to coronavirus. That's the warning of infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci. He says that daily case counts could more than double to 100,000 if people's behaviours don't change. Fauci added, clearly we are not in total control right now. He declined to estimate a number of potential virus deaths, but said that the total would be, quote, very disturbing. And here in the UK, children in Leicester will be heading to school for the last time for at least another 2 weeks today. The city's been put into a localised lockdown, meaning that classrooms will have to shut tomorrow. The decision to extend measures like closing non-essential shops was taken following a spike in coronavirus cases in the city. Global News 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Caroline Hepker. This is Bloomberg. Matt.
Caroline, thanks very much. Now let's get over to the U.S., where they had a pretty good quarter in stocks. Yeah. Nathan, I mean, my mom, I will get a little personal here.
Okay.
Back at the beginning of March, was on the phone with me every day in tears, like, I'm not going to be able to retire, I'm going to have to move in with you, how can I get citizenship in Germany, etc. Little old professor out of Ohio, now she can breathe a sigh of relief. She's only down 4% in the year.
Well, I mean, roller coaster ride doesn't really quite capture what we've been through so far in 2020, does it?
No, it's been insane. I mean, imagine if you called that right. Anyway, we were down so hard, then I think the S&P was up 20%, the NASDAQ was up 31%. Today's the first day of Q3.
Right.
What have you got coming up?
Well, we're wondering where things go from here. We're seeing just a little bit of trepidation, perhaps, as we dip our toes into the third quarter. You just heard that warning from Dr. Fauci about the continuing effects of the coronavirus. States are starting to dial back a little bit on reopenings. What does it mean for this roller coaster ride we've been on so far? We're going to have Ben Laidler of Tower Hudson Research with us this morning. We're also going to talk with Andy Pekosh of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. We're going to get his take on how we get ahead of this pandemic that in many ways, particularly in the health aspects of it, it seems like the U.S. has been a step or two behind throughout. We're also going to have the latest on the new national security law in Hong Kong. It has just gone into effect and already led to a couple of arrests. Bloomberg's Sophie Kamarudin will join us for a live update. All coming up with me and Karen Moscow as we get the second half started on Bloomberg Daybreak. Matt.
I'm just looking at the WEI screen, and I want to point out something. I tell Anna this all the time lately, or at least I say it on emo. But the U.S. is doing so much better than Europe on a year-to-date measurement. If you look at the S&P 500, it's only down 4%. If you look at the NASDAQ, it's up 12% year-to-date. But if you look at what's happening here in Europe, you know, the FTSE 100 is still down 18% and change year to date. If I look up the stock 600, which is the broader European equity index, it's down 14% year to date. So we have a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, a lot of divergence in terms of the rally. Yeah, that's been a big part of the story. We'll get Ben Laidler's take on that as well.
All right, Nathan coming up with Karen. If you're listening on Sirius XM, if you're listening on London DAB, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance.
And we were just talking to Kurt Custard from Newton Investment Management, where we met, and one of his points is that there's just too much old economy in Europe versus new economy, and that, you know, plays to the point that you're making about how a lot of the outperformance in the US is because of the tech sector, and that's where a lot of the money has wanted to go to. Let's get to another guest this morning. David Riley joins us. Factories across the euro area saw a stronger performance than initially reported in June, talking of old economy, with the PMI hitting a 4-month high of 47.4. So things may be moving in the right direction, but still expansion out of sight. Let's talk to David Riley, Chief Investment Strategy at Blue Bay Asset Management. David, I wonder how much the PMI data, this kind of data, works for you right now, because the purchasing managers that are surveyed to get this stuff, they've been through the pandemic just like everybody else, and I wonder how much 2020 vision they have of the future. How do you treat the data that we're getting at the moment?
I treat the PMI data with more care than usual, I would say, because I think the evidence is that the PMIs are a less good guide through big shocks to the economy and to sentiment. One could argue that actually the PMI should be much, much higher if it really was an indication of a month-on-month change in terms of level of orders and sales. And the fact that they're not, I think, sort of reflects that in practice they're really suggesting what is the level of output against expectations and sentiment level. I think what is undoubted is that after the mandated shutdowns and the subsequent easing in those restrictions, that we are having a bounce. But I wouldn't read then too much into specific PMI levels at this stage, to be frank.
What do you think about? Yesterday, we weren't getting too excited ahead of Boris Johnson's New Deal speech because we knew that the numbers were going to be small, really relatively tiny, £5 billion, and that was already in the budget. But is there any place where you get excited about more stimulus to come? Because it would be great for investors especially to see a New Deal announcement, a real, like 500 billion or 1 trillion.
Okay, I closed my position on British pound with £2,000 profit at 123.94.
The outlook in terms of fiscal policy, I think fiscal policy is going to have to do much more of the heavy lifting in terms of supporting the broader recovery and ensuring that it's sustainable. And when I look at on the outlook on the fiscal side, I mean, what has made me excited in your words has been the EU Recovery Fund proposal. Not only because of its relatively large size, but because I do think that if it is passed with a substantial grant element to it, that it will be the first pan-European fiscal policy response that is meaningful and is a step towards fiscal union, which I think enhances the credibility of the Euro project. When I look to the US, which is I think Washington's done a good job in terms of responding to this crisis from a fiscal perspective, but a lot of that support is coming to an end. And so what worries me a little bit is whether Congress and the administration will reach an agreement to provide what is required, and that is another fiscal package.
David, thanks very much. Thanks for your time. David Riley, Chief Investment Strategist at Blue Bay Investment Management. And as ever then, Matt, these markets seem torn between the latest headlines on the virus, which still seem gloomy. It would be an interesting thing for us to discover if Western democracies prove themselves able to deal with flare-ups. There's that. But then on the other side, as soon as you start worrying about that, investors mention what the Fed does and the fact they're all over these markets right now, or what governments are going to do with fiscal stimulus. So there's still a lot to talk about.
There is, and we've kind of flatlined as well. I mean, regardless of whether you look at the S&P or the stock 600, we kicked off June, for example, on the S&P at 3103, and right now we're trading at 3101. So you saw almost all of this incredible rally happen from March 23rd to May 30th. And it's going to be interesting to see how the third quarter continues on. This is Bloomberg.
When your tenants have a burst pipe and you've got a busy day ahead,